at a later date and time. All right, so my name is Jeannie Jaworski, and I am so excited to be here with you this morning to be talking about a topic that I know a lot of us in higher ed and student affairs are interested in, and that is the tech industry. So we have an incredible panel, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves in just a moment. Just a few kind of logistical things. Everyone is muted for this call, but the chat box is open. So feel free to put any questions you have along the conversation. You can shoot them in the text box, and I'll make sure and add them to our conversation today. If you want to ask an anonymous question, you have two options for doing so. The first is you can change your own name. So if you want to rename yourself in the Zoom call, you can do that and then send your question, and folks will not know who is behind that question. The other option is semi-anonymous. You're welcome to send me a private message, and I will see your identity, so I want to be clear about that, but I won't reveal your name when I add the question into the conversation. Another thing is that you are welcome at any time to raise your hand. There's a little raise hand function on Zoom, or just type the word question in the chat box, and I'm happy to unmute you so that you can ask your question directly to our panel as well. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, and on your screen there is a link. It is a bit.ly link, so it is case sensitive, but you're welcome to go to that link, and there is a document for each of our panels. We only have this weekend so far, but I'll add next week over the weekend, and it has all of our contact information for all of our amazing panelists. So if you want to reach out after the call and follow up with anyone whose journey spoke to you, you're invited to do that. Our panelists have been so amazingly kind in allowing you to have access to that. Okay, one last thing that's not housekeeping at all, but is just super important, is that it is Juneteenth, and I want to make sure to provide a resource for those of us who are still continuing on in our journey about learning more about this important day in our history. So this is an organization that I have zero affiliation with, but in the chat I'm dropping a link here, an organization called Webflow. I found this on LinkedIn. They've put together learning tracks. It is for their employees, but the resources are open to the public. So there's 5 different tracks, a bunch of different learning about Juneteenth, as well as different racial injustice issues that all of us really should be aware of at this time and always. So we'll go ahead and get started, but I hope in your day today you make time for that as well. All right, thank you again, panelists. I want to have you introduce yourselves, and if you could just start by giving your name, your current title, as well as what your background is in student affairs higher education. And Sai, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks. My name is Sai Harris-Adam. I'm currently a senior product analyst and team lead at Madaket Health Incorporated, based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. I did the first 9 years of my career in higher ed. Straight out of college, I did 1 year working registration at Harold Washington College and the City Colleges of Chicago. Another 5 years working at DePaul University in academic advising and administration, where I also got my master's degree in counseling psychology with a concentration in college student development. And then 3 years in student activities and orientation at Lesley University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, before I made the jump. What did I miss? Nope, all right.
All right, I'm Julie Hayes. I'm the Senior Growth Success Manager at Klaviyo, which is an email marketing software. I started out my career in higher education with my graduate assistantship at the University of Kansas in residence life, moved on to University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, where I was also in residence life, managing a residence hall of 1,200 freshman students, and then hopped over to Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts, where I was a resident director there, and then made the jump over into tech.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sara Kirby, and I am a client experience consultant with a company called Liaison, actually located, headquarters is in Boston as well. And I spent 15 years in higher ed, 2 years of graduate school at Ohio State in housing, a couple years at Southeast Missouri State in student leadership, student organizations, student involvement. And then about 3.5 years after that, working in professional and graduate education at Rush University, which is part of a medical center in Chicago. and then spent 5 years at College of DuPage, a large community college outside of Chicago, working in career services, specifically with internships and service learning. So I've been out of higher ed for 4 years now.
Hi, my name is Brett Meadors. I work at a company called Renhead. We're a fully remote shop, so we don't really currently have a headquarters. Our team's spread out throughout the country. I serve as the product manager, and then my background, I started out in residence life. I did my master's degree at the University of Utah. Worked a couple of years as a resident director, and then moved to working in student conduct for the past 4 years up until May of last year when I made the jump to what I'm currently doing as a product manager.
Great, everyone. Thank you so much. And I don't know if it happened for everyone, but on my end, Brett, when you said your company, it cut out. So I just wanted to, Renhead is where you're at, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Perfect. Thanks. Okay, so we have a number of questions for y'all. So to get started, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what you do in your current role and how you specifically use the background and the transferable skills that you took from your student affairs experience to be able to complete the different responsibilities that you have in that role. So for this one, Julie, I'll start with you. Oh, and you're muted, Julie.
I always forget to unmute myself. So yeah, I have a lot of overlap right now in my current role from what I was doing before. Previously, I was in a traditional customer success role, just a lot to one-to-one student success. There's a lot of overlap, a lot of challenge support, like getting people to the goals that they want to achieve, where you help customers achieve their goals with the software that you're using. Now I'm a growth success manager, which means that I'm managing a large unmanaged customer base. So they do not get one-to-one support. So I have to figure out where they are in their journey, how to get them the resources they need to get them to the next level to be successful. So there's a lot of educational theory. There's a lot of like what type of method is the most effective for teaching. There's a lot of live trainings. There's a lot of on-demand trainings, like figuring out how to best teach and meet people where they're at and get them to kind of where they want to go, which definitely was in line with my residence life experience, where I was meeting students where they were at and helping them get there to where they wanted to go, and thinking about how to facilitate things kind of outside the box.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Julie. Sarah, what about in your role? What are the transferable skills that you're bringing forward?
Yeah, so I work, the company I work for, Liaison, serves higher education. So their client is higher ed, and I work on a team that supports two products, Time to Track and Compact to Learn. So my job is to focus on representing the client experience for any projects that we work on, any new development projects that we work on, or any initiatives that are specifically focused on addressing the client's needs. So that might mean that I help with overseeing our onboarding and setup process. I do a lot of work with our help center content, making sure that it, is giving the training and support that our clients need. So everything I do, I come from the lens of the user. Is this process working? How can we improve this process? Those kinds of things. So obviously the biggest skill that I bring that's been helpful, of course, is my knowledge of higher ed. And, the fact that I've had the ability to work in all kinds of different areas at all kinds of different institutions and all kinds of different roles has been really helpful for the work that I'm doing. So I bring that knowledge in a way that the rest of our team can't, because they've never worked in higher ed. So the questions that I ask, the way that I think about the product is much different. I would also say, though, that being able, I think this is true regardless of role in higher ed, but the ability to sort of take a big picture approach and assess where the needs are is something I do a lot. So I'm always thinking, okay, does this work for the user? What about this piece? And in higher ed, I had a lot of opportunity to do that when looking at, various programs that we were launching, or when coming into a new role, as people might do, and sort of look at that from a broad perspective. I would also say that just the ability to manage multiple projects, I'm sure the other folks on the panel can relate to that, but being able to just keep things moving. The fun part about at least with my company and working outside of higher ed as things move more quickly. And so it's really those skills to be able to manage multiple things is a really key skill that I bring to the position. So I would say those are probably the top three.
Awesome. And actually, it's so funny because last night, tech came up in our diversity and inclusion panel, and the speed at which the tech industry moves was something that was talked about a lot. And I just want to share for folks who are joining, I will say by far, without any question, the tech group is the one who completed everything I sent them for the panelist information the fastest. They completed that doodle poll the fastest, and they were all on time for our pre-meeting. So I can say that, you know, just that demonstration is y'all are used to just doing things as fast as they come in. All right, Brett, what would you like to say?
So Sarah stole like most of my answers, but that's okay. For me, in addition to all the things that have been said, I found my student conduct background dealing with upset parents, attorneys, you know, whoever wanted to yell at me on that particular day, has been really helpful in my role. I work, in addition as our product manager, I oversee our support team and our help desk. And so if things are getting escalated, they tend to get escalated to me. And so being able to calm people down and really dig into what the problem is, not focus on the fact I'm getting yelled at, has been really helpful. And dealing with a client that, you know, is paying us a good bit of money to provide a service to them. I think also being able to manage crises has been very helpful. I'm more an agile shop here. And for people that aren't in tech, what that means is we develop very quickly. We develop and push out with some bug testing, but not as much as we probably should. And so there are times that bugs will pop up in our software, and it can cause somebody to have an issue with being able to complete a task. And really being able to manage when those issues come up and get them fixed in a quick manner has been very helpful. But being able to kind of stay calm and handle crises like that, which are, you know, an emergency to the person that it's happening to, but may not be an emergency to the team that's trying to fix it. Really kind of implying and showing them that, you know, it really needs to be taken care of in a quick and efficient manner.
Great, thank you so much, Brett. And Sai, what do you have to add about your responsibilities and the transferable skills?
Yeah, so I work at a very small company. We're sort of just the large side of a startup. And so it means I wear multiple hats. And the two main things that I do are, I'm the team lead for our product analysis team that does back-end administration. So we do the setup on the software so that the people who are using it can use it smoothly, efficiently, and don't break it. And then I also work as an embed in our product and engineering teams, helping, as Brett mentioned, prioritizing bugs, saying, okay, this is the feature that we need first. Here's why. The client's asking for this. What can we give them that'll actually work? And I think everyone's been saying things that are incredibly important, and I'd want to add to those factors. One is for those of you with backgrounds in academic advising, systems thinking, like looking at the piece of what you're working on and seeing how it interacts with everything else around it. The ripple effects that happen when you're dealing with software are huge, and being able to see that and adapt to it quickly is very helpful. The other is that for the activities work, student activities and org advising, that is project management, full stop. If you're doing it yourself, you are throwing events, you are coming up with results, getting them, figuring out how you fail. If you're advising students, you're teaching them. You are saying, hey, what's your end result? How are you going to get there? Show me this, reverse engineer for me the workflow you're going to take to get there. And that's all stuff that's incredibly transferable.
Awesome. That's really helpful, because I think that for me, the product piece is kind of what seemed to be overwhelming, and I didn't see, you know, the product manager was like, I don't know how to manage a tech product. So to know that the exact, you know, things that we're doing in supporting organizations and students is transferable is so helpful. So thank you for that. Okay. So I want to talk about the first year on the job. I know some of you are still in that first year, others, it was a long ago, but what was it like? How did you, what gaps did you have in your knowledge from student affairs, higher education, and what did you do specifically to address those skills gaps? So for this one, we'll start with Sarah.
That's a really good question. I'm probably a little bit unique on the panel in that I work in a consulting capacity for Liaison, and so my work for them has evolved and changed over the years. And as I think about sort of how I've grown into the work that I'm doing now, I would say that I didn't really see a lot of necessarily gaps. And part of me says that because I always joke that I've made a career of doing things I've never done before. You know, every higher ed job I had was largely new. And so I have always been comfortable kind of jumping into things. But I would say, you know, the biggest challenge was learning the product. I had actually used the product as an end user. And so I knew it from that perspective, but just going in and learning what everybody else already knew. So I spent a lot of time, you know, just playing, figuring things out, which I always did in higher ed. I was always the one to figure out, you know, how to update the website or use a CRM system more effectively or those kinds of things. And we are an entire remote team, which I imagine my colleagues are as well. And so, you know, building relationships, getting to know people, that takes a little bit longer when you're remote, just because it's a different way of engaging with people. So just taking time to really get to know people in different capacities, learn about the work that they were doing, you know, getting comfortable. I would say the biggest piece, although I don't sell, I'm on a lot of sales calls. And I work a lot with new clients. And so you're sort of always selling your product because you want to retain your clients, right? So learning how to be comfortable in that capacity when needed has been a learning experience for me. And I've just spent a lot of time listening to the folks who do our sales calls, asking them questions, getting their feedback on emails, those kinds of things. So I would say the biggest gap for me has been in the sales capacity, because indirectly you're all doing sales in some capacity. And because I'm on the phone with clients so much, that was something that I really had to learn.
Great, thank you so much. Brett, you're in your first year, right? So what has been your...
No, I'm actually year and 3 months almost. So
sorry. So
no
it's
worries.
Recent memory, at least.
Yes.
What was that first year like, and what skills gaps did you need to fill?
Sure. So I think for me, the first year was definitely a little bit of a transition. My background obviously was in higher education, and I work in a company that does workforce management. And so there was a lot of language, like business specific language, that it took me a little while to pick up. And so being the person that handles, in addition to our product and our help desk, I also handle a lot of our implementation and like our training. And so I created a document for myself that I've shared as we've onboarded other people for, here's the language you need to know. Here are the terms that our clients use, here are the terms that we use, kind of like a little dictionary of all the acronyms that you may pick up or hear, which I think was definitely a little bit challenging for me to pick up. It really was just doing a lot of research and being comfortable asking questions of the people that you're working with, the people that, you know, or your coworkers as well as your clients. I had no problem being like, hold on, I need you to tell me what this is. I'm playing the new card. And I think that's totally acceptable to do. So I definitely think that was probably the biggest gap I had. I think everything else really, I was very comfortable with tech to start with. I was similar to Sara, really doing a lot of updating websites and figuring out how to run software our office was using and things like that prior to coming into the tech space. And so for me, it wasn't hard to pick up our platform or pick up the product management piece. It was really just making sure I was using the correct language and explaining things to people in a way that made sense.
Great, thank you, Brett. Sai, what was your first year like in that area?
Yeah, so the first year was trial by fire, right? So there were a number of things that were very new. This was my first real job in a for-profit environment. And so there's a cultural piece to that. And then also my company works in a very specific niche of healthcare revenue cycle management, which is by its nature cryptic and arcane. And what we do is automation of certain pieces of that world that are slow and manual and really could use someone to do it digitally rather than lots of forms and paperwork. But that meant that I had no context for the actual business that we were transacting. So that took some time to really get a hold of and figure out. So that was a big piece. And also because we're a small company, I mean, there are about 50 of us total. There wasn't a lot of time for people to do training. It was very much, here's your desk, we're going to start throwing work at you, and we're going to explain it as best we can as we go, and we'll answer questions when we can. We've got 5 fires we're putting out. So it took some doing. And then
joys
finally,
of working at a startup.
Truth, yes. The other thing is that I have a hobbyist's background in tech. You know, I took an intro comp sci course in college, and I've dabbled around here and there. But what really helped was being able to brush up on and pick up more SQL. Unfortunately, there are a lot of good free online resources to get you at least ground level on that. And so shout outs to Code Academy and SQLteaching.com and some of the other good free resources out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I share a similar background where I took that one intro comp sci class, and it was really interesting, like learning to code in Python. And, you know, I've lost most of that, but that's something that has been on my mind too. Great. And Brett, your comment about creating that document, I've heard that throughout several of the panels. So I don't know that that's always just industry specific, but something maybe that student affairs and higher ed folks are, because we're constantly creating resources for students. I've heard that a lot of people created the document that then they shared to the other new hires who have joined after them. So that's great. Julie, what was your first year like?
Yeah, trial by fire, but so there's definitely the cultural thing. So like, I just want to like set the framework for like, I am in Boston, but like on the first Friday that I was working, like the first Monday, I was like, okay, cool. Here's your desk. There's 1 day worth of like training. And then I was on the phones by the 3rd day, actually teaching people our products. So it was very, very fast. So take your time before joining a company and learning the software. If you're like Sarah and you've already used it as the end user, that definitely helps. But on the Friday at 4 o'clock, everybody's cracking open beers, which is quite different from my higher education experience. So just be prepared to like kind of see those very different experiences for that. I lucked out. So one of the things that I learned recently that I think I wish I would have learned at the very beginning is Molly Graham was at Facebook when she was like employee number 40. And she's talked a lot about tech and how it works and what you should expect. And a lot of it is you should be doing a different job every 2 to 3 months. The job is going to change that fast, and you have to be comfortable with that. And you have to constantly be seeking out that next opportunity or that next thing that's going to be great and exciting. So I started out, I was employee number 35 at my first startup. I left at employee number, we were at 200, 225. So I had held 6 or 7 different jobs during that time frame. There was a lot of, I do this and this and this and this. So I think that was a big learning curve for me, because I was very hesitant to let things go, because in higher ed, you want to hold on to what you have. I had the learning curve of like letting things go and like letting other people take them on and trying new things was something that was very new. I think another really big learning curve for me personally was that it was going to be okay when I made a mistake. Like it wasn't going to be the end of the world. Like we made a huge mistake with a client. It was really not great. And the CEO was involved, and he was like, well, we learned a lot from this, so we won't do it again. Good job, Julie. And I was expecting to have a very negative interaction around that, but it was all about like, okay, what did we learn? As long as we learned something, it was going to be okay. So that was a very big challenge. I've worked primarily in e-commerce, so I did have to learn a lot about e-commerce, but luckily I'm an avid online shopper, so I'm definitely aware of the end user perspective of that, so that helped as well. So knowing a little bit about what tech you're going into is very helpful.
Great, thank you so much, Julie. That's very helpful. Okay. So the next question I want to do is the very higher ed student affairs thing, which is what is the happies and the crappies, the rosebuds, the rose thorns. What's the very best part of your role working in the tech industry? And then what's the worst part of your roles working in the tech industry? And I'm going to throw this question to Brett to get us started.
Great. So I have 2 favorites, I think, and then 1 least favorite. I would say the favorite part of my role is getting to write the user stories and then see those come to fruition. So user stories basically when you're talking to a client and saying, hey, you know, tell me what features you want, and they describe something and you translate what they tell you into step by step, basically for the development team in a way that they're going to understand what they need to develop. And so it's really cool to say, have a client, you know, ask you for a feature, and then a month or, you know, 6 weeks later, see that feature come to fruition. And that's something I really like. The second part that I would say is favorite, and this may be company specific or maybe part of company culture, but our company is very results driven. Every job I've had in higher ed has been very much, you're at your desk from 8 to 5, and then, you know, if there's work after, great. Working at the company I do now, it's much more autonomous. There are days that I may work 3 hours, and there are days that I work 13 hours, and that's part of working at a startup, and that's okay. And I would say that the folks that are managing at a startup are generally kind of aware of that culture. There are times that it's totally fine for you to work from, you know, say 6 to 9 and be done for the day, because that's, the work's done. You've got, you know, you've got the results that you want, and so that it's okay to kind of take it easy the rest of the day. And I think that's very different from what higher ed kind of teaches you to do. In terms of what I don't like about my current role, I would just say that there, and I think this is a higher ed thing too, there's always too much work. I work at a company, we have 6 people that are here based in the States, and then we have a development team in Serbia. And for us, there's always more work than you can ever get done. And so not being able to get everything accomplished we want in the time frame we want as we're growing has just been a little frustrating, but it's something I think you expand, you know, when you're at a startup, you're growing so quickly a lot of the times that you're not able to hire as quickly as you want, but you know, you have to get the money in order to be able to do that, in order to bring on new clients. So for me, that would, I'd say, is the frustrating part for me.
Great, thank you so much. Sai, what are your highs and lows in tech?
Yeah, so I think the high that comes quickest to mind is the step right before Brett's, when there's a problem on the table, there's either a bug or some new feature that has to be done. And I get to sit in a room with really smart people and brainstorm it out and say, okay, how could this work? What are some ways we could try this? Let's try it from this way and that way. And just bouncing ideas off the wall, sort of nothing is too crazy to try. And by the end of it, we have a really firm, strong idea that then goes into user story, and then 2, 4, 6 weeks later is out there and it's done, and that's how it's working now. And that intellectual exchange there is really fun. I also agree on the culture piece. This is the first place I've been where they actually mean it when they say, we don't care as long as the work gets done. And that's phenomenal. And it's a good you know, office environment. I'm not in the office anymore. I moved full-time remote last fall. The office is based in Massachusetts. I moved to Indianapolis. But you know, it's good collegial atmosphere and very horizontal. You know, whoever you need to talk to, you don't have to go through someone's manager. If I need a question from the CEO, I go and talk to Jim. You know, if I need to talk to someone in a different division, I don't have to go through 5 committees to get something approved. Is this going to work? Great, it's in the queue. So
yes, that has been one of the big changes, I think, is not having all that bureaucracy in the way.
Yes.
You know, going to be able to talk to the owner or the CEO of the company makes things so much quicker.
Yes, absolutely. And then on the downside, and a different flavor of Brett's answer, there's always too much work, but there's also a fair amount of just rote data entry type work where, you know, I have client tickets, requests of things that need to get switched on the back end that just have to get done, and it requires someone to look up this reference number and enter this one there. And it gets boring sometimes, but it balances out with the other.
Great, thank you. And I guess a question I have too is that, you know, you both saying there's always so much work to get done, but then there's also this, it doesn't matter if you work 3 hours or 13 hours, as long as the work gets done. Do you feel like you are able to get your work done? Because I feel like one of the things in higher ed student affairs is like, all of the things I need and want to do probably actually never get done. It's always kind of sitting there. It's kind of just being able to get what I can. So do you feel?
So that's actually a really good point. I don't know if this is where I work or a tech more broadly. I work at a place that has a really good sense of reasonable life boundaries. So as long as I'm doing a reasonable amount of work for what's expected of me, Yes, I have a backlog, and if I worked overtime for a week straight, I could probably work that down. But nobody expects me to do that because I have a family and a life and I need to sleep. And so as long as I'm keeping up all right and staying healthy enough to bring 100% while I'm on the job, that's the expectation.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. I think that's a better way of putting, really what he said.
No, that's great. I just wanted to make sure because, I've heard on the other side, people complaining like your salary is based on a body of work, and it doesn't matter if that takes you 13 hours a day for 2 weeks straight, that's the body of work. And I know that there's difference between like high times and low times too. Of course, we all know that in student affairs, but great. So thank you for that clarification.
That's an important distinction, yeah.
Great. Julie, how about you? Highs and lows?
Yeah, so my absolute favorite part is I'm very much efficiency. So I am able to look at holistically our whole product, where people are getting stuck in the process of onboarding and being successful, and then applying solutions and running tests and trying to figure out how we can get people unstuck and get them to that next level. And I work primarily with small businesses. So I really thought that I would miss the one-to-one student interactions and like the helping the students. But I found that when I work with small businesses versus enterprise, I'm literally helping somebody's business grow. And you develop those relationships and you start cheerleading them. And it's just as rewarding as working with students. So that was one of my big fears leaving higher ed. And I found my niche that really gives me joy. Like when I can help double or triple somebody's revenue, like when that happens and they go to become really successful, like I'm really having an impact on somebody's life. So that's huge and super exciting. So those are the two things that I really, really love, like working with the data, trying to figure out what's going on and having access to all of this data and not having to jump through a whole bunch of hoops. I just fill out a form and the team that's responsible for that gets me the data set that I need, whether analyzed or unanalyzed, and away I go. What I don't like, there's actually not a lot that I don't like, because I kind of crafted out in this niche role. Now that I've been here for like 6 years, I figured out exactly what I like to do, but I've gotten really burned out being on the phone. Like there was a lot of times where I was on the phone for I was at a startup that wasn't really best for me, and it involved being on the phone for about 10 to 11 hours a day straight. So I'm a little burned out on the phones. So that I don't want to make it seem like it's all roses. There are some jobs where some people love that, and they love being on the phone and talking to people all day. I'm an introvert. I'm not one of those people. So good learning for me. So when I have to get on the phone, there's a lot of stress and a lot of like trepidation. So that's one of the things, but I don't have to do it very often. Since we're doing management and I'm in a senior role, I tend to do more of the strategic pieces.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, Sarah, what are your rosebuds and thorns?
Yeah, great question. I do want to apologize for my tech issues. I always think it's funny when the tech panel, someone has the tech issues, but I'm not in my regular office. So if I freeze, I'm just going to hang on. I'm on the phone. Just my apologies for that. But I would say my favorite things, working remotely is a huge plus for me. And for those of you that have been working remotely during COVID, that is nothing like working remotely normally, especially if you have children like I do. So just having that flexibility has been really important and helpful to me. The other piece is I love anytime we have an out-of-the-box client, so someone who is maybe complicated or a large client, I get brought into those conversations, and so it's really fun for me to be able to think out of the box and help solve their problems and figure out how our technology can connect to the needs that they have, and just thinking through all the processes and being that liaison between, the company and the client. So that's really fun and exciting for me. And just like learning about, programs and asking good questions and just being able to solve problems and make connections is really great. I guess a couple other things would be, I echo what a lot of people have said, but I've had the opportunity to help launch our newest product over the last year, Compact to Learn, which is a software to help track civic engagement and service learning outcomes. And I've had the great ability to bring that to fruition. I've worked very closely with our early adopters and people using that particular product, and working with a product that has, a bigger connection. I think sometimes people are worried when they leave student affairs, we won't have meaningful work. And, you know, being able to work on this particular product has been really dear to my, you know, interest and background in higher ed. And so just being able to watch that process and be part of that process has been really, really exciting for me. There was one other thing I was going to say, but I can't think of what it is. So I'll go to a couple of things that I think are challenging. One for me is patience with development. So if there's something that I know users need, you know, I want it to be done today. And so making, you know, having patience to understand that, you know, setting priorities and doing development work is, when I say development work, I mean the developers who are, you know, creating the updates and improving the product. That's complicated. It takes a lot of coordination and thought and planning. And so just, you know, being patient in waiting for, and, you know, what those look like can be sometimes frustrating for me. And then the other thing I would say is working remotely can sometimes be challenging. I love it. I wouldn't change it, but in my ideal world, I would love a day or two with face-to-face engagement with people, because I think there is work that can be done that way differently than remote. So I think those would probably be my highlights.
I would second that from a perspective that, you know, working remotely is great, but we got together as a team, both from Serbia and our US team, and did more in 2 or 3 days than we typically do in a month, just because you're in a room together and you can really kind of just sit and deal with what you need to deal with. So while there are benefits to it, I definitely think there are times it would be nice to be able to go and meet in person.
Great, thank you all.
I also really quick, I want to piggyback on something that both Julie and Sarah touched on, which was the sense of meaning that I think a lot of us went into student affairs chasing. And I was really scared when I left that I would lose that, and that, you know, I had this sense of purpose before where I was changing the world, right? I was shaping young minds, so on and so forth. And what I've found is that by detaching my sense of self from that particular cause and meaning, I can draw a lot from the good work that I'm doing without having everything tied to the highs and lows that come with the student affairs swing. So it's a much, I think, healthier balance than it's been.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that that's really helpful. And the fact that, you know, all of you are kind of echoing that, that's important for those of us who are looking for that. Okay, so now I want to shift, and pretty much the rest of our conversation, I really want to focus on, now folks know about your roles, how do you recommend they get into those roles? So if you could speak to, you know, what was your search process like? What did you have to do to your resume to make it attractive to a tech industry? Where did you find your tech jobs? What were the interview process like? Did you have to do an on-campus interview with, you know, a panel of 100 people and present? Obviously not. So Simon, have you kick this off, but I'd love to know kind of what recommendations you have based on your experience.
Sure. So taking some of those questions in rapid fire, I blew up my resume. I completely destroyed it, started from scratch. My academic resume was 2 pages long, very descriptive. This is all the stuff I was doing. No one in corporate wants to see that. Took it down to 1 page. Everything is bullet points. Everything is highlights and not descriptions. No one wants to hear what are the job duties. That's wrapped up in the job title. They want to see, what did you achieve? What's the high water mark? What did you do that was an improvement? If you can put numbers in there, so much the better. I see someone in chat mentioned applicant tracking systems. The best way to get around that is to make sure that you have space in your resume that is bulleted, that is keywords that you are drawing directly from the job posting. So there's a whole header section at the top of my resume that says, you know, relevant skills, and it's got about 16 spaces for bullet points, and those are plug and play from the job I'm applying to. The interview process was great relative to higher ed. I sent an application. From the first contact back, which was about a week or 2 from the application, it was less than a month from first phone screen to offer. There was an initial phone screen from HR, who was 1 person, a phone interview with the manager, and then an on-site that was less than 2 hours. It was four brief interview sessions with staff on campus. And that was it. A few days later, they give me the call. They're much more efficient. They're driven to be much more efficient. I will shamelessly plug, we are hiring right now for my team. I will drop a link in the chat if anyone's interested, wants to talk more later. But we move fast because we have to. As Brett was saying before, we grow faster than we can keep up with. So when we need new bodies, we need them fast. So I will say in terms of the search process, I obsess and fixate a lot. So I tracked down individual companies through every publication I could find in my location, and I bookmarked all of their HR pages and checked them religiously. What actually got me a job was angel.co, which is a job placement website for startups specifically. So highly recommend that one. Also, LinkedIn actually works if you're not in higher ed. I get recruiter calls usually once every month or two, at least. And so you keep your LinkedIn up to date. And again, bearing in mind the highlights, not the full CV, that's going to be a big help.
Great, thank you. Julie, what was your search like?
So I lucked out in a handful of ways that unfortunately don't exist anymore. So I met my now husband, who was the CTO of a tech company. We'd started dating, and he's like, your skills would be really great in tech. Like, do you realize you could be making a lot more money doing less work in tech? And I was like, no. And he's like, eventually we became more serious, and like he helped me facilitate it out. So one, that helps. Two, the Startup Institute Boston had just launched. They were 2 years in when I joined, and it was a career accelerator for people who had been full-time in another career that were looking to get into tech startups, because there's not enough talent for tech startups. And so this was trying to fill a niche. So I went through that, and they helped me revamp my resume. They helped teach me how to interview. They helped me teach how to do like coffees and informal interviews. Gave me some skills that I needed in order to like kind of level up, and then launched me out into the tech startup world. So I actually just applied and I put in a resume at the small tech startup, Evergage, that I started out with. And it was super fast. So I interviewed on a Monday with the VP of customer success. They were looking for somebody with HTML experience and the ability to hop on a phone and like interact with the customer with some EQ. And almost everybody here checks those boxes if you've been in higher education. So I hopped into customer success doing that. I thought it was tech enough that I could pivot into doing more tech if I wanted. It was a really interesting opportunity. 4 days later, I was brought on site. I had 3 interviews, and then I went on a walk with the VP of customer success, and he offered me the job. So it was really fast, and I started on Monday. So it was a really, really fast turnaround for me. So I didn't really modify my resume as much. Like, we went through the stuff, but a lot of it was based on informal coffees. If you are in Boston, if you are in New York, if you are in Chicago, if you're in one of the major tech hubs like San Francisco as well, asking people, like, I know this is more of a Boston thing, but asking for coffees, like, obviously you can't do that now, but asking for Zoom meetings, everybody's willing to pay it forward. Everybody got where they were in the Boston tech industry because somebody took time out of their day to help them like make an introduction. So everybody's willing to do that. So I learned a lot. I went on a lot of coffees. I kind of figured out what I wanted to do by talking to a whole lot of people, which is not my favorite thing in the world to do, but it's very important. And then just narrowed it down. I was like, I remember meeting with the CEO in my interview, and he's like, student success, that's a lot like customer success. Walk me through how you de-escalate a situation. And like immediately got it and was like, okay, this person, I can put them on the phone and they're going to like be okay. And they can walk through tech problems, no problem. So that's how I got my first job. And then after that, since I'm on my 4th tech job now. Startups usually have a life expectancy that's shorter. So I've been through a couple different startups in my time. I don't even have a resume really anymore. Like, people just know that I've done a job and they've heard of me through the industry, or they like can see like, you were a customer success manager at this job, which means you did this. So yeah, let's bring you in. And nobody looks at my resume anymore. I like very rarely like update it. So that's a really good thing about this as well.
I want to chime in really quick. what Julie was saying about connecting with people is really important. I'd also stress that you don't have to be in one of the major tech hubs. There are a lot of networks for people in the smaller, and particularly in the Midwest. Hey, Indy. But there are a lot of groups that are building and close-knit networks in places that are cheaper cost of living and cheaper operation of business that are really kind of booming. So across like Minneapolis, Pittsburgh, Indy, like there are a lot of burgeoning hubs that might not be the big ticket, high cost places you're thinking of. So there's hope.
Great, thank you. Sarah, what do you recommend for folks who are looking to get into tech on the job search based on your experience?
I'm going to answer this both from my experience and I'm going to put my career coach hat on. Both from my work in career services, but I also do some career coaching on the side as well still. One of the things I want to add about the conversations is that those, part of the reason why they're valuable to people, the obvious is that you build a new connection and expand your network. But for those of you who are trying to figure out what is it that I want to do, and I see that a lot in the Facebook group. How did you figure this out? What else can I do? Is that having these conversations is going to give you that clarity, because there are thousands of jobs that exist that you have no idea exist, right? Like if you would have told me I was working for a tech company, 5 years ago, I would have laughed, because I didn't know that these positions existed. And so it's important that you go out and just learn, and that those conversations are genuine, that you're interested in understanding, so that you can start to clarify for yourself what's exciting, where your skills align, what jobs are actually out there. And that goes for any industry at all. I mean, that's not specific to the tech company. The way that I ended up in my job, I actually got a different consulting job from networking, from conversations. And when I was deciding to leave higher ed, I was actually working with the company that I work for now. So I was using their product and had been working with them for about a year. So when I decided to leave to go do this other consulting job, I asked them if they hire consultants. And I just kind of said, hey, I know you're working on these things. Do you ever hire consultants? I would love to talk to you about an opportunity. And we got on the phone and I sold myself, and here I am 4 years later. So I think part of it too is always leveraging those relationships, because you never know where they're going to go. And I saw a question like, how did you decide the tech industry versus another one? And for me, that was never necessarily a conscious decision. It just was sort of the opportunity that presented itself, and the relationship sort of led me there. So, I think those pieces are of paying attention, being curious, learning about what else is out there is hugely important. The other two practical things I would add is that just to tag on what Sai said about the resume, you only need to highlight the relevant experience. So we are famous, higher ed, for putting every single job duty that we've ever had. Nobody cares. They want to know what you've done that's relevant to the job description. I highly suggest functional resumes if you're moving completely different industries, because that allows you to better organize your resume in that capacity. And there's one more thing I was going to say. Anyway, just making sure that you're really connecting those. Oh, the second thing was, it's really important that you understand, that everybody understands what their skills are. And most of us sort of have this general idea, but it's important to really dial down and say, okay, if organization is one of my skills, or communication, what does that mean? How do I do that? What's my style? Why does it matter? And how does it impact the work that I do? And so I think making sure that you're doing that prep work for yourself while you're doing exploration is going to help you build better, job search documents. It's going to maximize the benefit of your conversations and be helpful to you long-term.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. Okay, Brett, so I know you've got experience with applicant tracking systems, ATS. What can you tell us about that? And then also, what can you tell us about your search process and recommendations? Oh, and you're muted right now, Brett.
I realize that. That's an everyday thing for me. So our company, one of our part of our platform is an applicant tracking system. And to really touch on what Sai said, like those keywords are infinitely important. The way our ATS works is it works mainly on matching the skills. The recruiter goes in and lists skills that they want. And if those skills are on your resume, the way we parse those, it then pulls into the system. So if you're missing those keywords, it's going to basically think you're not that great of a candidate because you're not pulling in those keywords. You're not getting a high of a match percentage as someone who has those keywords. So it's really important to look at those job descriptions and pull in the relevant keywords. In regards to my search process, I took about, I'd say 12 months of just on and off applying to different jobs as I saw them using my higher ed resume. It's one of those things that never really did anything for me. I took the time, and because I was so busy, I actually hired a career coach. I hired somebody to help me with my resume and with my cover letter. And again, my resume was 2.5, 3 pages long with all the experience I had, and they cut it down to a page with results driven and results oriented bullet points. And I saw a difference in the number of interviews and the type of interviews that I was getting. And so I think it's definitely important that if you are in a position that you can save up a little money, I think I spent about $400 total doing my resume and cover letter. If you can save that up over a period of time, career coaches can really help you take your skills and put them into the language of the type of industry you're going into. My background, like I said, was in higher education, but I am pretty familiar with tech, but still translating what I was doing into the technical aspect was a little difficult. And so I think that it is really important that, you know, if you're able to do that, you can, or relying on your network to kind of help you put that information together. Similar to the others, I was hired on pretty quickly. I had one interview with who would have been my coworker, and then I had an interview with the 2 co-founders of the company. And I was made an offer like a week later. And I think that, you know, you really do have to be willing to move quickly. I gave 2 weeks notice and I was out, which is very rare for higher ed. I see a lot of people in the different Facebook groups being like, I need to give notice of 30 days, or I need to give, you know, I'm giving like 3 months notice. Like tech really, you have to be willing to move quickly if you're wanting to get out. You have to know what you're worth and be willing to, you know, get out when the time is right, not worrying about what's getting left behind for others to deal with.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I want to acknowledge that at least one of our panelists and maybe others have a hard stop at 10:15. So if others are wanting to stay on a few minutes later, we can maybe get to one more question. But before we transition to that, I do want to just thank you all so much for all of the information that you are sharing here. It's so helpful. If you're not paying attention to the chat, attendees, make sure you are, because they're adding so much information in that chat as well, so that we can maximize this time here. One question that came in that I wanted to ask about is product management. So I think that there's a bit of confusion about what that actually means. So would someone, and I saw you had talked about how it already translates to higher ed. Would you mind kind of expanding on what that is?
Yeah, I want to clarify. I said project management.
Project. Oh, okay. That makes more sense to me.
There's a big distinction there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Will you talk about that then a little bit, the project and
Sure.
product and all that?
So project management, we're talking about pretty much anything, whether it's an event or an artifact or something that you are taking from concept to completion, right? You are saying, we're going to host this, you know, honors award ceremony for our students. That's a project. We're going to enact this particular policy, and we're going to up retention by X%. Like, that's a project. Product management, as is addressed in the tech field, I feel like has much less of a direct correlation to anything I did in student affairs. But if you think about the software that you're using on a daily basis, whether you're in PeopleSoft or Colleague, or if you're doing an organization management system for your students or something, think about what it takes to get a particular feature or a bug fixed. Each of those items and how they get prioritized, how they get addressed by the engineers, keeping track of all that, prioritizing that, that's the product management piece. So
I would
communicating
also,
between, yeah. No,
I would
jump in.
also add, so Liaison, the company that I work for, they have multiple software systems. So we have product managers that work with all of those different software systems, and they're sort of an account manager, but in the context of the product itself. So a lot of the work that I do is similar to the work that product managers do. So they're sort of the expert on that particular product, or that version of the product, if you will. And then they're working in many of the ways that Sai just described. They're looking at improvements. They're building relationships with the clients or the partner associations or whatever it might be. So there are, and I think that, there's lots of ways that higher ed experience could translate there in many of the ways that Sai articulated, but those certainly are, both of those, project management and product manager or product management, are certainly areas that would relate well to student affairs experience.
And I do want to say product management at every single company, just like residence life at every single college, is just a little bit different. So it's very hard to do product management as a big chunk or a career. Like a Java engineer is going to do Java engineering, and it's going to be very clear and straightforward. Project management is very nebulous and depends a lot on the technicality of the founders, and like a whole host of things. Like, are you agile? Are you Scrum? Like all the different things that you could be doing. Like, it's just wildly different.
Yes.
Which I'm sure Brett can talk to.
Yep, for sure. And I mean, as you get to larger companies, you may also have specific product owners for different part of the products. So, for example, if Sai and I work together, Sai might own, the CRM portion of the software, and I might own the analytics portion of the software. And if there's anything that needs to be done on the CRM portion, Sai is going to be prioritizing what those bugs are, what those feature requests are, while I'll be prioritizing what is the feature requests and bugs on the analytics side. And so it is very different at every company, but I think it is definitely something that you can use your skills from student affairs to, help you branch over to.
Awesome. Okay, there's another great question that came in privately. Startups seem risky to those of us who are in higher ed and our institutions have been around for 150 years. So how can you speak to how can you gauge if a startup is risky or not, too small, too big? Like, how do you go about that? And Julie, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I got some really great advice going very early, like in Startup Institute, that I want to share with everybody. If you are averse to risk, find a startup where the founders have young children, because they're in it for the long haul. This is their children's college education that they're working with. So like their children's future, and they tend to be much more stable. If you're more ready, try out anything that you want. But I've only worked at startups where the founders had children, or they were no longer startups. They were very large companies. So, and I have found that to be true. They do make more risk-averse decisions. And if a startup fails, you will find another job. Like everybody, what happens, and I don't know if in Boston when Wayfair laid off a bunch of people, the whole tech community hosted a whole bunch of jobs fairs and everything to make sure everybody got jobs. I can't throw a stone and not hit 6 companies that are hiring for my role. So once you're in, it is very easy to hop, and nobody's going to judge you if the startup went under. Like that's not your fault. One of my startups was acquired by private equity, and I was like, not my jam. So I hopped, and I have a 9-month job on my resume. But then when everybody asks, they look at it and they're, oh, this is when they were acquired and merged with another company. You probably didn't want to deal with that. So it's totally fine. But those are my 2 pieces of advice.
I would add to that, in addition to founders with young children, if you can find out founders who have done this before successfully,
yes,
that's another good sign. The other is look at their funding. Go to TechCrunch.com, has a lot of good information, but you can see how much money they've raised and how often and how frequently, and you can read into that how stable they are.
Yeah. I would say that I might be in a little bit of a unique position with the startup I work for. Our owners privately funded the entire thing.
Bootstrap.
So it is one of those things that they grew very small for a number of years, but when I came on, they had been around for 6 years. And so I looked at that as being pretty stable for being able to fund it themselves and make enough money to pay them plus the other employees at our company. That looked pretty stable to me. And so it was really just, being comfortable with taking that risk and knowing that, it's going to be okay to, step out of the comfort of a government job.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Sarah, specifically, I know that you need to jump off the call. So once again, thank you for being here with us.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry for the tech challenges, but this has been really fun.
No, it was great to have you. And I don't know if any of our other panelists need to go. I do have, did I see no? We can go for five more minutes? Okay, perfect. So I have two questions. One says low priority, but I think a lot of us are curious. So those jobs that say unlimited PTO, what's the scoop? Is it really unlimited? Can you actually use it? Tell us
Your
about
mileage
that.
may vary.
Your mileage may vary.
It's definitely company specific. I work at a company that when I started, we did not do unlimited PTO. But the cultural impression was basically, if you need to take it, take it. But when this last fiscal year started, then we switched over. They actually paid out everybody on their PTO that they had left, and then we switched to an unlimited PTO policy. And our company is really good about it. We're taking a three-week road trip in August. I'm taking time off through the holidays. Not any sort of big deal. It's just getting the work done when it needs to be done.
Yeah. The fact that they paid that out when they made the shift, that's a very positive sign that they actually need it.
Yeah.
Right.
So PTO, I won't work anywhere with like set number of days. I like tried to go back at my last startup and like only had like 20 days and I was like, what? So like I need it, and I won't work at a company that doesn't have it, and it is amazing. I have worked at a company that had unlimited PTO, but anything over 3 weeks needed approval from the CEO. That was an 800-person company, and I was like, that probably means no. So always read the fine print, and they'll talk about it in the interview. They'll, like in my current jobs interview, they're like, I know it says unlimited PTO. You may think that means that you take less, but if you don't take enough PTO, the CEO tracks this and will email you and be like, what are your plans for taking it in November? And if you don't respond or you don't take it, he will lock you out of the building for the last 2 weeks of the year. So we need it when we're like, you need to take it. So it's very much like we're in this for the ultra marathon. You need to take time off. Like I usually have 1 day off a month just because I'm like, I find that makes me a better employee. It's great.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. No. So my department's understaffed right now. Obviously we're hiring.
Always.
So again, check out the link I threw in there. Hit me up later. But that means I haven't taken as much time off recently, and my boss has been writing my case about it. And I'm taking 2 weeks end of July, and I'm going to be leaving my team extra short staffed, and we're just working around. Again, it's an extension of that as long as the work gets done piece, right?
Yeah.
If you're on top of yourself on a regular basis, you take vacation. We're behind right now. I'm putting in a little extra work right now to make sure I'm not leaving my teammate in the lurch. I'm still taking vacation.
Yep.
It is really expensive to replace a startup employee. So they are very invested in keeping you rested and able to continue to perform.
I also want to note, we've mentioned it briefly in passing. The pay really is significantly better. I was an assistant director of student activities at my last gig, and like decent growth track there. I switched over to an associate position in tech and got a 48% pay raise.
Yep. I literally messaged just being like, hey, I want to talk about knowing your worth and salary negotiation.
Let's do it.
That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, because similar to Sai, when I stepped out, I took a 25% raise from what I was doing. And within a little less than a year, I took on another 10%. Just because I was doing a good job. So it's really important to know what you're worth, because what I would have asked for coming out of higher ed was definitely way lower than what I ended up asking for after talking to some folks in my network and talking to others in the industry. And I felt really uncomfortable asking for as much money as I did. And, you know, it's really knowing that there is more money in the corporate world, and that it is important to know and be able to explain to other people why you want to be paid what you want to be paid. But they're not going to be shocked when you go and ask them that number. You know, they did.
I negotiated badly because I was conditioned by higher ed.
Yeah.
I could have gotten more.
Yes. The 3 key phrases are the 2 things. So I'm making 4 times what I was making in higher education. And I continually double, like it keeps going up, and I'm like, why are you paying me this? But I'm going to do it. And I can tell you that when you're making a lot more, you can deal with a lot more BS, like when stuff happens. So, but I will tell you that the key to this is adding 10K. Just
Yep.
add 10K to what you think you're worth. And then they're going to be really honest with you. There's also the equity factor if you're working in startups. So
Yes.
I was employee number 35. They're like, we can't make what you're asking, but we can meet it with bonuses and we'll give you more equity. And so that was investing in the long-term future of the company. So there's a lot of different levers to pull. So they may not be able to meet your salary, but they may be able to do bonus structure. So you do pay more in taxes, but you know, there's a lot of pieces that go in there. The 3 sentences that you want to say is, I'm really excited about this offer. It's a little less than I was expecting. Can you do X amount higher? It is okay. They expect that counter negotiation unless they've been upfront and been like, the salary range for this is this to this, and you're asking for above that salary range, but don't be afraid to ask for top of salary range.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. So there is a question, but I just want to like rapid fire this one because I have to go because we have another panel that's starting shortly here, but I think this is a good question. So people are worried that they won't sound like they know what they're talking about that first, you know, few months on the job when they're making that transition. So how did your supervisors respond to that? So the inability to kind of know the lingo, know the acronyms. Does anyone have a really good example of how their supervisors handled your transition and what to expect?
They sat down with me in a room. It was the only time we ever met in person, and basically took half a day on a whiteboard and said, here's what you need to know. So I think it's just knowing that you're not going to know what you need to know when you started a tech startup.
And you've been
or
given
at a
grace.
tech company.
Yeah,
Yep, you get grace.
Yeah.
It's just patient. One of my old supervisors used to say patience, grace, and trust.
Yeah.
And it's just really knowing that that's really important to just remember in this industry.
Yeah. I mean, the field that my business works in, there is no reason anyone would know anything about the bizarre acronyms and transactions that go on unless you're working in it. So there's an expectation of course you don't know this.
Yeah.
I would say like, I just totally lost my train of thought. Molly Graham, again, I'll share in the Expatriates group a link to her speech and an article she wrote, but she's like, as long as you're willing to look like you have no idea what you're doing and own it, like everybody's really comfortable with that. If you're like, hey, sorry, can you explain that to me? And you learn so much. And everybody's just really cool. Everybody likes to teach people. So you get to put somebody in a position where they're teaching you, they like you.
Yeah. Tech is a field of learning by doing from
Yes.
at every level.
Mm-hmm.
So come out with that attitude and you're on the right page already.
Wonderful. Well, you all, thank you so much. This has been so helpful and you've gotten through so many questions that folks have. Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I don't know if you can throw those clap Zoom call little emotions, that'd be great. But thank you guys. This was fantastic. The recording will be posted. And again, our panelists were awesome and willing to share their contact information. So
feel free to reach out.
Yes.
Thank you guys.
And again, come work with me.
Wonderful. You've done a pretty good job selling it today. That's for sure. Wonderful. All right. I am going to transition. I'm going to kick everyone back to the waiting room if you're staying on for our next panel, which is private housing. So I'll kick you all to the waiting room and then I'll open it back up for the next one at 10:45. Sai, Julie, Brett, Sarah, who already departed, thank you so much.
And thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing this.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome. All right.